Are you here to improve your investment strategies? Are you looking for that one article that could help you finalize that decision you were holding off? Well then, get ready to learn more and gain just that subtle extra knowledge to get an edge in the investment business. Because if you're new here, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Daily Fortune, a channel where we talk about all the latest news, updates, guides, and strategies related to investment. Of course, with that said, we're going to be discussing a lot about the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, The Big Short, Michael Burry, the money tree, Cathie Woods, Tesla's very own CEO and eccentric billionaire Elon Musk, along with the rest of the big leagues to learn just a bit more from the professionals. And don't worry, of course we talk about crypto, and we also talk about the best stocks to invest in, along with many tips and tricks on how to handle your finances so you never lose. So before we talk about making money, remember to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell as well to make sure you won't miss a single video. Now let's get started. The famous investor, Warren Buffett, shared something about what he learned from his 80 years of experience in the world of the stock market. It's something that could help us realize and help our decisions in investing. This is a summary of what Buffett had to say in a conference. To start with the discussion, on March 31st, Buffett compiled a list of the world's 20 most valuable corporations based on stock market value. Many of those names may be familiar to all of us. Apple led the pack with a valuation of slightly over $2 trillion, and the number 20 spot was worth over $330 billion. Those are the top 20 corporations in the world by market capitalization as of March 31st.
Look at that list. Starts off with Apple. Saudi Aramco is a pretty kind of a specialized company. It's I don't know whether it's 95% owned by the government or what, but it's essentially a country that's for sale there in terms of that business. But the top of the top 6 companies, 5 of them are American. So when you hear people say that America hasn't, it's not working very well or something of the sort, in the whole world, of the 6 top companies in value, 5 of them are in the United States. And if you think about it, we talked a little about this last year, but in 1790, we had 0.5% of the world's population.
A little less than 4 million people, 3.9 million people, 600,000 of them were slaves. Ireland had a population larger than the United States. Russia had 5 times the population of the United States. Ukraine had twice the population of the US. And what do we have for the US? Well, as Buffett described it,
he had a map for the future, an aspirational map, that somehow now only after the Constitution, 232 years later, leaves us with 5 of the top 6 companies in the world. It's not an accident. And it's not because we were way smarter, way stronger,
America had good soil and a pleasant climate, although some of the other countries I've mentioned had excellent soil and climate, and the system had worked incredibly well in those countries. Consider how 5 of the world's top 6 corporations came to be part of a country that had only a fraction of a percent of the people just a few hundred years ago. Let's go back to the list and try to guess. What about you? How many of those companies do you think will be on the list in the next 30 years? There were 6 American companies on the list at that time. They have General Electric, or GE, there was Exxon, IBM Corp, and these are still around, and then Merck, but none of them made the list 30 years later. However, it serves as a reminder of what remarkable things can happen. It's always changing. And unexpected things do happen, even things that may appear obvious to you. Japan had a long-running bull market. They had several Japanese companies on the list, but there are none today, while the United States had 6. However, they are not the same 6.
The United States had the 6, now we have 13, but they aren't the same 6. I would invite you to think about one other thing as you look at this list. 1989 was not the Dark Ages. We weren't just discovering capitalism or anything else. And people thought they knew a lot about the stock market, and the efficient market theory was in, and it was not a backward time. And if you look, the top company at that time had a market value of $104 billion. So the largest company in the world, Tidal, in just a shade over 30 years, has gone from 100 billion to 2 trillion. At the bottom, the number 20 has gone from 34 billion to something a little over 10 times that. That tells you something about what's happened with equality, which is a hot subject in this country. It tells you.
It gives you some information regarding inflation, but this is not a particularly high inflation time. However, it demonstrates that capitalism has worked exceptionally well for the capitalists. It's a fairly incredible amount. Do you think it could be duplicated in the next 30 years? Where you could take 2 trillion for Apple and increase it by any firm to get 30 times? It may appear impossible, but we need to be confident in ourselves as investors, even if the world can shift in dramatic ways. Here's one more example from Buffett for us to consider. When you start to feel overly confident in yourself, one thing it demonstrates is that it's a wonderful justification for index funds. Buffett said this statement, "The main thing to do is to be aboard the ship. You know they were all going to a better promised land. You used to know which one was the one they'd necessarily get on, but you couldn't help but do well if you just had a diversified group of equities. So the most important thing is to be aboard the ship you're most familiar with."
U.S. equities would be my preference, but to hold over a 30-year period. But if you thought you knew a lot about which ones to pick, or the person that you had hiring, you were paying a lot of money to, had all these ideas, they could tell you their best ideas in 1989 did not necessarily do that well, although overall equities were absolutely the place to be.
And the second thing is, people are usually attracted to particular industries. Like for example, if the company is a popular industry, you can sell IPOs. You can sell stocks in people who ignore sales and earnings numbers. You just know it's the right place to be. So it's not a big deal even if Buffett was born in Berkshire Hathaway in 1903, just like the beginning of Ford Motor Company by Henry Ford. It wasn't any big deal or some sort of big news back then either. The company also failed a couple of times, but you know what? The company transformed the world, and when we think about it, we have a fantastic auto insurance business. And we wouldn't have Geico if there weren't any cars. But it changed the country, and then the report brought in the $5 daily pay, which was a major deal for auto assembly lines. Imagine you see the interstate highways in 1903 when there were 290 million vehicles on the road in the United States. If you are well versed on the subject, and you'd probably say it would be automobiles. It will be cars or vehicles. Buffett bought Marmon from the Pritzker family a few years ago. The Pritzkers had developed this business from many companies that they'd acquired, and the name of their company was Marmon. They called it that because they owned this firm called Marmon, which had won the first Indianapolis 500 in 1911.
Maybe that's why they called it Marmon. They were proud of the fact that the company in 1911 won the first Indianapolis 500. It also was the company that invented the rearview mirror. I'm not sure whether that was a big contribution to society, and certainly around your household. Rearview mirror, you don't want to emphasize too much, but they the car that was entered in the Indianapolis 500, the guy who normally sat next to the driver and looked backwards to tell what the competitors were doing, he was sick, so they invented the rear view mirror. So let's just assume that you decided that autos were this incredible thing, and someday there'd be an Indianapolis 500, and someday they'd have rear view mirrors on cars, and someday 290 million cars would be buzzing around the United States, or autos, or the county trucks there. And so I decided to look at the history, and I thought I'd put up the list of auto companies from over the years. I was originally going to put up just the ones that were the M's so I could get them on one slide. But when I went to the M's, it went on and on and on. So I just decided to put up the ones that started with M-A. And as you can see, there were almost 40 companies that went into the auto business, just starting with M-A, including our Marmon there in the middle column, which lasted for a while, quite a while. It was selling cars in the 1930s were really quite special. But in any event, there were at least 2,000 companies that entered the auto business because it clearly had this incredible future. And of course, you remember that in 2009, there were 3 left, 2 of which went bankrupt. So there is a lot more to picking stocks than figuring out what's going to be a wonderful industry in the future.
So there's a lot more to picking stocks than figuring out what's going to be a great industry in the future. For example, the Maytag company put out a vehicle Then there was just a Nebraska motorcycle and everyone established a car company. Just like everyone else is starting something now to get money from people. There were only a few people who picked the winner to get the opportunity at Ford Motorhead before they had a few partners, and he didn't like them. So Buffett then figured out a way to buy them out, and that was sort of the start of the auto finance. According to Buffett, that's a long story, so he didn't go into details. But you couldn't buy a Ford motor, and of course General Motors became the dominant company. Finally, when Henry Ford didn't make the transition from the Model T to the Model A, it didn't work out very well. So the main point that Buffett wants us to know is that it's not as simple as it sounds. Unexpected things may happen, and there would be good and bad results. Thank you for watching. So that's it for today. I hope you learned something from today's video, and to get updated with the next videos, don't forget to hit the notification bell. See you next time.